Okay, what we're doing today is we're looking at, first of all, some of the information that we've got from the Garrick book. Now, the Garrick book is outside of our period. So we've got Shakespeare up to 1616, and then we've got the modern production that we see that we're writing about. But the reason why the book is important is because it talks to us about the way that the performances of Shakespearean plays were sort of going in the 18th century. And so what we can see is, to a certain degree, influences from Shakespeare's period, Shakespeare's time, and the direction it was moving in. So, for example, there was a rhetorical style of acting in the 18th century. And what you guys need to do is you need to look and see when that rhetorical style started. Did it start, for example, during Shakespeare's lifetime? Because what we're trying to work out is, if we walked into his theatre in 1599, what would we see? What would it be like? Now, one of the things that we do know is that with this rhetorical style acting, there were codified movements. So, and codified means that there was a plan, a system of movements that you did for certain things. So love might be to hold, one of the states of love might be to hold the heart, another might be to hold one hand over the heart and the other hand outwards to mean I love you. There might have been another one which was to touch the heart and do that, which means love goes away, or something like that. So there was a language of gesture. And lots of physical movement from the actors was considered to be vulgar. When did that happen? Did that happen in Shakespeare's lifetime? Was it naturalistic style acting, or was it actually this codified style of acting? And that's what we've got to look at, where it's the physical gestures are after the French style, actually. Are they something that was going on during Shakespeare's lifetime? We don't have it now, because now we find it very artificial. But the reason for that is because we've had the influences of Freud and the influences of Stanislavski to change our theatre. Declamatory acting. Now, one of the things that we've talked about in today's lesson is that declamatory acting, which is this big acting where you declaim, and to declaim means to speak it out in this very big way, rather over the top. So to be or not to be, declamatory, loud, big, very, very, not like having a private conversation with somebody in a naturalistic way. It's not naturalistic. Even today, the style of performing Shakespeare, it might at points seem to be relatively naturalistic, but in terms of a modern natural drama, or something just as straightforward as EastEnders on the television, it isn't naturalistic in that sense. Now, Thomas Betterton apparently adopted this style of declamatory acting, but that is after Shakespeare's period, so we still need to find out when he had adopted that or adapted that. Was there already something existing in the performances of the Shakespearean theatre of that time? There are things in the Garrick book about the nature of the beautiful voice, and I think that is what you need to look at next, is were actors required to have the beautiful voice in Shakespeare's lifetime? And this is the thing that I want you to think about. In Shakespeare's lifetime, he was considered a poet, not so much a playwright. He was called the Bard of Avon, or the Swan of Avon, because of the beauty of his verse. Well, if you are being thought to be a wonderful person because of the beauty of your verse, there is an inference there that in performance, the beautiful sound of that beautiful verse is going to be more important. And this is the key thing here. Elizabethan audiences did not go to see a play. They went to hear a play. That is something we need to look into. We need to work out why that is. And where does that come from? I'll talk to you about that, about where that particular phrase comes from. It actually comes from Shakespeare himself, but you're going to have to find it. Costume. Well, we know that in the 18th century, that costume was not necessarily very nice. In some cases, it could be a bit shabby. And part of the reason for that was that the costume itself was based on what people were wearing at that time, the fashions of that time. But obviously, if you were playing a royal role, then the material would have to be cloth of gold or cloth of silver or maybe rich purples or something like that. That is true of Shakespeare's period also. If you went to see a performance in Shakespeare's lifetime, I'm not saying that the costumes would be shabby necessarily, I don't know about that, but what I do know is that they would reflect what the Tudor people were wearing at that particular point. So, for example, if you were watching a production of Julius Caesar, which is a Roman play, today you might see them in togas. In Shakespeare's lifetime, you would see them dressing what ordinary people were wearing in the street. So, for example, if I were putting on a production of Julius Caesar in accordance with the way they did it in Shakespeare's time and the way they did it in the 18th century, it might be jeans and sweatshirts because that's what people are wearing, or maybe, Louis Vuitton bag or whatever it might be. In addition to that, a naturalistic element was working its way into the drama of the 1700s. So in 1741, Cibber gave a performance of Shylock, which was based on certain naturalistic principles, and they use the phrase the science of acting or something like that. I don't think we'd see it today in terms of science. It's not like we think of in physics, chemistry, and so on. But he did some research. He researched Jewish dress and how they looked, and he decided to try to make his characterization more realistic. We would probably today not find it a truthful performance, but in terms of the time, it was much more truthful. So here's our question arising from that. In Shakespeare's lifetime, was there an attempt at naturalistic acting? Because Cibber is trying to do it in the 1740s. Is that because between 1616 and 1740, so that's from when Shakespeare died to when Cibber was preparing for his role of Shylock, during that period, did they change their way of acting? Or is Cibber changing what he inherited from Shakespeare's lifetime?